I call the honourable member Claire Curran.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to speak to a particular part of this bill which I focused on a lot when I sat in the Select Committee over all of those months, over all of those years, and we heard evidence from investors, everyday investors who came before our committee and told us about losing their life savings and cried in front of our committee. And we heard those stories and saw them up front and saw them face to face, which is something that every Select Committee should try to do, is to meet with and hear from the people who are affected by lapses in law, gaps in law. It was an important, critical part of this bill that we addressed the criminal liability, and I acknowledge the comments of my colleague David Parker earlier around the job that we had on that Select Committee of ensuring balance, as Select Committees often do, but to ensure that there wasn't a chilling effect occurring for directors of companies, that they would be put off because they would think that they might end up before the courts and even in jail for the issuing of material that was not fully correct. But the fact was that over the period of years when these financial companies collapsed and the effect was escalated into our communities and affected so many people we know, that there had to be significant measures put in place that would be a deterrent to that kind of behaviour, to the reckless and knowing behaviour that of unscrupulous people that were essentially ripping off ordinary New Zealanders. We have argued throughout this process that that perhaps it hasn't gone far enough, and that in this country people are convicted of offences like burglary can be treated more harshly than those who have destroyed huge amounts of wealth through reckless and dishonest business practices. But I would like to say that there is a key change in this bill, and that is that the issuer and the director are criminally liable for misstatements in their disclosure documents, but only if the Crown proves a subjective fault element, and that is the reckless knowing behaviour, that they had to know what they were doing. It wasn't a mistake. If it was a mistake, there is still a liability, but it comes into that civil area. It does reduce the scope of criminal exposure, but the maximum punishment has increased, 10 years imprisonment, $1 million fine for an individual and a $5 million fine for a body corporate. And promoters, this was a particular issue that I focused on, because people who invest and make decisions to invest as everyday investors often do so because they trust the person telling them that they should invest. And often those promoters have been celebrities, people that New Zealanders have trusted. There have been countless examples of that. Our view was, and we were told by almost all of the submitters, including those ordinary everyday New Zealanders who appeared before us, that they trusted those people and they felt ripped off. The promoters of statements are also liable, criminally liable, and I think that's right, because I think that if you are a celebrity and if you go and stand up and go on television or whatever and have your face all over the place saying, trust me and invest in such and such company, then you should know what you're doing and you should take responsibility. And this bill ensures that they will, and I think that's right. At the same time, though, there was an important set of principles that underpinned in the criminal liability area, that the regime should not discourage capable, prudent people from becoming directors through overly punitive sanctions, and that companies should be able, Mr Chair, to attract directors with a diversity of skills and backgrounds. That directors should be able to focus mainly on business strategy and supervising management rather than on compliance and minimising liability. That directors should supervise capital raising and exercise due diligence in relation to offer documents. That they should be liable for civil pecuniary penalties and compensate investors that lose money if they fail to perform their duties, but that they should not be liable to imprisonment where there is no fault element. Those principles, as I understand it, have remained in the bill. They are important principles because they are the principles that protect directors from that chilling effect, from that fear that if they slip up, if there's a mistake made, that they might end up in the clink. It's important that they don't, but it is important that the ones who are reckless, the ones who are dishonest, and the ones who know that what they're doing is wrong are accountable, and that they end up in the clink. And I support. I'd like to see it happening. I'd like New Zealanders to be able to be reassured that if they invest their money in a company that's dodgy, that tells them lies, that they will be held accountable. And if there's one thing that I think is in this tome of a bill, it's the mechanism to ensure that that happens.
The Honourable Mr Chairman, I want to just make a few brief comments on the bill and